Welcome to Status Secure, the weekly cyber threat briefing for executives who refuse to operate in the blind. Hosted by the Watcher 6 Collective, uniting former Army Special Forces and Naval Special Warfare Communications operators, alongside an industry-leading CISO nominated for Cybersecurity Woman of the World. We cut through the noise and give you the operational intelligence you need for mission success in a hostile digital environment. The enemy is listening. Is your status secure? Welcome to Status Secure. Today we're asking a very uncomfortable question to anyone in the government contracting space. Are you putting revenue before national security? For years, the industry lived on the honor system. You wanted to win a DoD contract, you checked the boxes, promised you'd fix the security gaps later, and chase the revenue. But when you lie on a compliance form to win a bid, you aren't just cheating the system, you're leaving controlled, unclassified information exposed to our adversaries. Today, we're discussing why the Department of Justice is finally treating poor cybersecurity as a federal crime. What are your thoughts on this, CISO?
So I mean, there's always been the supplier risk, right? And the government, government contractors have typically provided their security score as a gate, right? As one of the criteria to be able to bid. And it didn't require any kind of third-party attestation. It was just pretty much, hey, tell us your security score based on a supplier's performance risk system, right? That was to measure how well you protected controlled, unclassified information for the government, right? It's just it was a security metric. But again, government contractors looked at it as like, okay, I need a certain score in order to bid on this contract, right? It was a gate. It was a revenue gate. It kept them from being able to make money, right? So what they did was they just put in there a really great score so they could bid on the contract, which I think where we are now, where there have been major breaches, cyber incidents, the DoD and the DOJ, and the Department of Justice and the feds just in general can't allow that anymore. Because they realize, they've realized it for a while now that, we're not just fighting on land, sea, and air. We're also fighting in cyberspace. So, if you're a government contractor, you're part of the military, right? You're part of the federal defense for the nation. And so you can't just say you have a great score. They can't just trust that. It's the basics of security, trust but verify. And the honor system was just trust. There was no verification. So now they're saying, hey, this has really great impact. And so, they can no longer just trust. And if you are not, your security posture is not that great, but you say it is just so you can bid on the contract, that is considered fraud. And it's a federal crime because it has really great impacts. I mean, think of all of the cyber breaches. Like the big one I can think of is that one where like millions of military personnel information, right, is just out there in the dark web somewhere, right? You just can't have that anymore.
Yeah. So how does a technical failure like skipping a patch or ignoring access controls because the IT budget was too tight, how does that turn into a federal fraud investigation?
Well, first you have to take a look at what's called the FCA, the False Claims Act. And so I think that was I can't remember the exact year, but it's been around, right? But now the DOJ, they're using it. Right? They're using the FCA, the False Claims Act, to say, hey, if you are basically, making a false claim that your security is better than it is, right? Then they're going to use that in order to investigate you, in order to take you to court, in order to get financial restitution and to, make sure that you and everyone else understands that that's no longer tolerated, right? And they're going to make you an example. And I think one of the big things is, whistleblowers, right? What they've seen in just 2025. So that was just last year. There were 1,297 whistleblower cases filed. Right? That's over 1,000. And then basically, let's say, for instance, they do, you're a whistleblower, and now they, the federal government says, okay, this is a very valid case. They start investigating, right? And so they do their investigation, it goes to court, and there's a settlement, right? So a whistleblower will get about 15 to 30% of that settlement. And the settlement is based on the way that they do this, how much a company has to pay, besides the fact that you no longer can bid on government contracts, right? If you had a federal clearance, that is no longer, they revoke that, right? So you lose all of that. You can't bid on government contracts anymore. Then on top of it, they say the cost is 3 times the contract. So if your $1 million contract that you wanted this revenue so badly that you were willing to lie to get it, now it's going to cost you $3 million. And a whistleblower will get 15 to 30% of that. I mean, that really makes a difference, especially if they feel like you're not doing, you're supposed to be protecting, a national security, and you're not doing that. You're putting our national security at risk. Of course, a whistleblower is going to be like, hey, this is the right thing to do, and I'm going to make money, and I don't have to do any of the work because the government will go investigate. And this affects not only the prime, but the subcontractors. So primes, right? So if you're a primary on a government contract and you use subcontractors, you should be worried. You should be worried about your subcontractors because they could cost you a lot of money.
Yeah. And I guess, why does this happen? Is it malice? Are these government contractors just overwhelmed by the cost of compliance and just trying to keep the lights on? I guess, what would be a viable reason for neglecting these areas?
I think because historically, they've been able to get away. I mean, it's not malicious. It's just historically they've been able to get away with just having a POA&M, right? A plan of action and milestone, being able to say, hey, we're aware of this risk and we're managing it because we've identified it and we have a plan to fix it. And so because of that, they use that as a reason to say that they're governing their security, so their score should be higher, right? And it's just cost, right? Because it can be too expensive to do all the controls. NIST 800-171, I think there's over 100 controls that they have to implement. And so as a business, they're like, okay, I'm trying to, especially if they're just starting or early on, they're like, we need to make money. We can do these controls later.
Yeah. So when the Department of Justice steps in because of the whistleblower report, and I know you mentioned some things that could happen, but what are some other negative consequences to revenue on like the executive team that, like they're trying hard to protect their business. They're trying hard to protect the revenue, their income source, the work they're doing, maintain their contracts so they can then do a good job and they can get the next contract, right? So there's a lot going on here. But what are the maybe other financial consequences to sort of not putting a priority on this?
Well, they're making accountability is really big now, right? Because they say, hey, you're the board, you're the executive, right? Saying that, well, my security team said it was good, right? Is no longer an acceptable response, right? So personally, the board, individually, they could be, they're going to have financial, like I've seen now on court cases where they named individuals in the court case, not just the company. So if you think you're creating a LLC or a corporation and you're not going to be personally liable, you need to really get an attorney's opinion, because these days they name, they're naming individuals. So if you signed off on it and you didn't get any kind of verification except from your security team or your IT guy, you're not doing your due diligence. It's so easy to get a third party to do the review. I mean, there's so many companies that do that now. So, that could bankrupt you personally, and it can definitely take the business, out.
Yeah. So let's talk about marching orders for these government contractor executives listening to this, things they can take away and maybe think about, maybe something that's actionable that they could implement. Because we want to protect national security, but we also want to run a profitable business. So how do we align the two starting tomorrow?
I mean, I mentioned it earlier, which is, get a third party and tell them you want the truth. Because you have to be careful, because sometimes when you hire third party assessors or auditors, they're trying to make sure that they have repeat business, right? So, they're trying to balance that and doing an actual audit. So you right away just tell them you want the honest truth. You're not going to be upset if it comes back and they find a lot of problems, right? So that's the first thing. That way you can get a real understanding of your security. Second, in parallel, you can go ahead and review where your controlled unclassed, your CUI data. You need to build what's called a CUI enclave. It's even in the CMMC requirement, right? Is that you have a CUI enclave, which means that that data for the government that you're working on is segmented. It's high, it's got all the security controls in it. It's isolated from, the rest of your network, right? So you're not commingling data, the government and the private, and just make sure that it's segmented. And this way it helps a lot, because you don't want to implement everything on your entire, network and for your entire company. That gets too expensive. But if you just put your government data in its own area, I mean, that's why when you look at, there's so many, like if you do cloud, they have a government cloud, right? And so you use that. Make sure you use that. Don't be building, if you're going to contract with the government, don't be building your stuff in a non-government certified cloud, right? Those are the things you can do right away.
Got it. Thanks for that. So the perimeter is no longer just your network. It is the legal and ethical liability tied to every contract you sign. If you put revenue before national security, you could ultimately lose both. So mission success is about operational integrity. So let's execute to the standard, and we'll see you next week. Mission success isn't about luck. It's about preparation. You've heard the intel. Now, go put it to use. If you need to verify your security posture, I've established a secure line at watcher6.com/secure. Go there to get the briefing the enemy doesn't want you to have. We'll see you next week. Until then, keep your head on a swivel.